Ever wonder if our courts can be so slow that it's like justice itself is stuck in traffic?
Hmm.
What about when cases drag on for years? Who's making sure things move along? There's this Supreme Court case, that really got people talking about those very questions. And today we're gonna dive deep into it.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to break down this administrative matter. It's Office of the Court Administrator versus Judge Victor Teves Sr., former presiding judge, and Tito Valencia. Process Server Regional Trial Court, Branch 54, Lapu-Lapu City, Cebu. That's a mouthful, but it's administrative matter number RTJ-21-2606. It was decided February 9, 2021. And the whole thing started with these, you could call them checkups on how the court was doing.
Right, judicial audits. We've got two main ones that really set off this investigation. First one was back in 2016, February 22nd to March 3rd, and then a follow-up in November 2019. So we want to get past the headlines and really understand the nuts and bolts of this case, the legal stuff and what the Supreme Court actually decided. It all comes down to accountability in our courts. So tell me, where did these audits lead us?
Well, that first audit in 2016 at RTC 54, where Judge Teves was in charge, it kind of raised some eyebrows. The Office of the Court Administrator, the OCA, they saw some issues with the court's procedures and how quickly cases were moving or not moving. So they went beyond just making note of it. They actually sent Judge Teves a formal directive, telling him what to do.
And it wasn't just a gentle nudge, was it? I mean, the OCA, in their memo, July 4th, 2016, basically gave Judge Teves a whole to-do list. That included taking action on 10 cases, 5 criminal, 5 civil, that were basically just stalled.
It's really interesting when you see the numbers, how many things were piling up. The OCA also found 19 criminal cases and 4 civil cases with motions or incidents that were just hanging there, unresolved. And they didn't just want him to act, they wanted him to explain the delays on 3 other criminal cases and 19 civil cases, plus delays in actually making decisions in 5 criminal and 22 civil cases. It's easy to imagine how things would get backed up.
Absolutely. It's like a logjam in the system. But the OCA didn't stop there. They also asked about 44 annulment or nullity of marriage cases that seem to have been handled without all the right documents. And then there's this side note, almost a little juicy detail, where they asked Judge Teves to investigate something called a sinking fund, supposedly from donations connected to marriages he had officiated.
So a whole lot of stuff for Judge Teves to address. How did he respond to all of this initially?
Well, he replied in September 16, saying that most of the issues had been sorted out except for 11 bail petitions that were still being reviewed. He blamed the delays on a bigger workload, his clerk of court taking on a new role, a legal researcher not doing their job properly, and the resignation or retirement of the civil clerk in charge. And he said he had no idea about this sinking fund and promised to stop accepting those types of donations.
So he offered explanations, but it seems the OCA wasn't entirely satisfied. They issued another memo in October of 16, kind of reiterating what they wanted him to do, and they added a few more things, like asking him to stop smoking in the courthouse, to avoid improperly dismissing or archiving cases, and to make sure those annulment and nullity cases were handled properly.
And things kept escalating. By March of 2017, the OCA sends another memo, this time really putting their foot down. They basically told him to explain why he shouldn't be charged with some pretty serious offenses: gross dereliction of duty, inefficiency, incompetence, because he wasn't complying with their directives.
Judge Teves responded again in April 17, mostly repeating his previous explanations, but giving a bit more detail on the annulment cases. He said sometimes the public prosecutor's office was doing investigations without court orders, and that those missing documents were actually in the case files. He also mentioned relying on the process server's reports to show that summons had been served properly. While defending himself, he did admit to some shortcomings and asked for leniency.
Now, it wasn't just the judge who was under scrutiny. The OCA issued separate directives to the clerk of court, Pacas, and the process server, Tito Valencia.
Yeah, focusing on Tito Valencia, he was the process server. The OCA wanted to know why he had used what's called substituted service in several annulment cases. Substituted service is basically when the summons isn't given directly to the person being sued, but is left with someone else or at their address. And what really stood out was one case where this substituted service supposedly happened all the way in Parañaque City, which is outside the jurisdiction of the Lapu-Lapu City Court.
Valencia explained that he had a ton of work and was even temporarily doing the job of the civil clerk in charge, which led him to, not strictly follow the rules on substituted service. He admitted his mistakes and asked for some understanding.
But the OCA kept digging, especially about that service in Parañaque. They wanted proof, How did he manage to serve the summons when the address wasn't even complete? How did he get there? Who did he give it to? They even named the person, Marbel Amumping.
Valencia claimed that the person who filed the case gave him a plane ticket, and he used the address from the initial legal papers. But he couldn't show any evidence of his travel. So, the OCA came back with more demands. They wanted a certification from the airline, proof of Amumping's identity and address, and an explanation for why he personally served the summons in Parañaque instead of contacting the court there. They also wanted to know if he was even allowed to do that. But, unfortunately, Valencia didn't meet those demands.
Fast forward to November 2019, and that's when the second judicial audit happened. By this time, the court still had a huge backlog. 714 active cases, most of them criminal cases.
Now, the clerk of court at Pancas, he did submit reports and copies of orders and decisions, showing what had been done on those cases that were flagged in the first audit. The OCA acknowledged that Judge Teves seemed to have dealt with those specific cases, even categorizing them by their status.
So Judge Teves had acted on those specific cases, but the OCA still saw problems with how documents were being attached to case files. However, they blamed this particular issue on the branch clerk of court and the clerk in charge, since they're the ones responsible for keeping those files organized.
So all of this leads up to the OCA issuing a formal recommendation in October 2020. They said both the 2016 and 2019 judicial audit reports should be treated as a regular administrative complaint against Judge Teves and process server Tito Valencia.
And they didn't mince words in their findings. They said Judge Teves was guilty of gross inefficiency and gross incompetence because he didn't decide cases and resolve those pending motions within the time limits set by law. They recommended a fine equal to 6 months of his salary to be deducted from his retirement benefits.
For Tito Valencia, they found him guilty of simple neglect of duty because of those problems with serving summons. They suggested a fine of 20,000 pesos and a stern warning about his conduct in the future.
The OCA's report really highlighted how long those delays were for Judge Teves, ranging from a few weeks to, get this, 13 years and 3 months in some cases. They emphasized that he never asked for more time to handle these cases, and he didn't give good reasons for waiting so long. And they mentioned that he had other administrative complaints against him, too.
So it all went to the Supreme Court, and they made their decision on February 9th, 2021. What did the highest court in the land have to say?
The Supreme Court, in their resolution, they completely agreed with and upheld the findings and recommendations from the Office of the Court Administrator.
Let's break it down, starting with what they decided about Judge Teves.
The court really stressed that resolving cases quickly is super important, not just for the people involved, their right to a timely decision, but also for public trust in the whole system. They specifically mentioned Section 15.1, Article 8 of our Constitution, which says lower courts have 3 months to decide cases, and they cited Section 5, Canon 6 of the new Code of Judicial Conduct, which says judges have to do their jobs efficiently and promptly.
They even brought up a previous case, Office of the Court Administrator versus Geiling, to emphasize that these deadlines aren't just suggestions, they're mandatory. The Supreme Court fully agreed with the OCA that Judge Teves was guilty of gross inefficiency and incompetence because of those really long delays, some over a decade, in resolving incidents and deciding cases.
And they pointed out that he never asked for more time or gave a good reason for taking so long. They noted that under the rules of court, undue delay in resolving cases is considered a less serious offense, but the penalties can still be serious, like suspension or a fine. They mentioned that Geiling case again, where a large fine was imposed for similar delays in lots of cases.
So the Supreme Court went ahead and imposed that fine on Judge Teves, equal to 6 months of his salary, to be taken from his retirement benefits. They made it clear that given how long the delays were, how many things he hadn't resolved, and the fact that he never even tried to ask for more time, this punishment was warranted. They basically said that all judges have to meet high standards of diligence and efficiency to maintain the integrity of the judiciary.
Now, what about Tito Valencia, the process server? The Supreme Court talked about how crucial process servers are. They're responsible for making sure documents like those summons are properly served. And that's important because without it, the court doesn't even have the authority to hear a case.
They agreed with the OCA that Valencia had been negligent in his duties by not doing substituted service correctly. They pointed out that he himself admitted to not following the rules laid out in a Supreme Court decision, Manitowoc versus Court of Appeals. He said it was because he had too much work.
And the Supreme Court also mentioned that Valencia had violated administrative rules by serving a summons outside his jurisdiction in that Parañaque case without properly coordinating with the court there. He couldn't explain this, which further supported the finding of negligence.
So the Supreme Court found Tito Valencia guilty of simple neglect of duty. They decided on that fine of 20,000 pesos and a stern warning like the OCA recommended, considering that this was his first offense since he joined the judiciary way back in 1986.
All right, so let's recap the Supreme Court's decision. They officially recorded the judicial audit reports as an administrative complaint. Judge Teves was found guilty of gross inefficiency and incompetence and fined 6 months' worth of his salary to be deducted from his retirement benefits. Tito Valencia was found guilty of simple neglect of duty, fined 20,000 pesos, and given a stern warning. And all the justices of the Supreme Court agreed with this resolution.
This case, with its consequences for both a judge and a process server, it makes you think, doesn't it?
Right.
What does it tell us about the Supreme Court's commitment to having a court system that's efficient and holds people accountable? How does this affect how you see our justice system and the right of everyone involved in a case to have it resolved in a reasonable amount of time? It's definitely something to ponder.
Absolutely. It raises some important questions.
We're really interested to hear your thoughts on this deep dive into the Supreme Court case. Leave your comments below, and if you found this helpful, don't forget to hit that like button.
Let's quickly go over some key legal concepts that this case highlights. First up, speedy disposition of cases. This is a fundamental right, protected by the Constitution, that ensures cases are handled without unnecessary delays, which is vital for fairness and maintaining public trust in the judicial system.
Then we have gross inefficiency and competence, especially when we're talking about judges. This refers to a serious failure to do their job properly and within the time limits established by law, which can really damage the administration of justice.
And for court personnel, like our process server in this case, we have simple neglect of duty. This is when they don't exercise the level of care and diligence expected of them in their official duties.
Lastly, the rules on service of summons are super important. These rules make sure that people or entities being sued are properly notified about the lawsuit. That's essential for ensuring fairness and giving the court the authority to hear the case.
All of these concepts are connected, and they're crucial for a justice system that works properly.
If you want to explore more significant legal cases and understand what they mean, make sure you subscribe to the deep dive. Don't miss out on the chance to be truly informed.